There are things floating 250 miles above Earth that astronauts have seen but can't explain. Objects that move in ways physics says shouldn't be possible. Lights that appear and disappear without source. Phenomena that NASA classifies, documents, and then refuses to discuss publicly. These aren't conspiracy theories. These are official reports from trained observers with perfect vision, advanced scientific knowledge, and absolutely no reason to lie. In 1965, Gemini 4 astronaut James McDivitt photographed an object with cylindrical arms extending from a white body. He watched it for 40 seconds before it disappeared. NASA analyzed the photo. They couldn't identify it. McDivitt, a veteran combat pilot and engineer, insisted it wasn't a satellite, wasn't debris, and moved unlike anything he'd seen. The photo is in NASA's archives. The object was never explained. In 1996, Space Shuttle mission STS-75 was deploying a tethered satellite when the 12-mile-long cable snapped. Video footage shows dozens of disc-shaped objects maneuvering around the broken tether, changing direction, pulsing with light. NASA said they were ice particles close to the camera, but the objects moved behind the tether, meaning they were miles away and enormous. The footage was broadcast live. Millions saw it. NASA's explanation satisfied no one. In 2017, astronaut Paolo Nespoli recorded video from the International Space Station showing 5 lights in perfect formation moving across Earth's atmosphere, then suddenly accelerating and disappearing. The video was posted to NASA's official feed, viewed by thousands, then quietly deleted. No explanation, no follow-up. Just gone. But here's what should terrify anyone who thinks we understand what's happening 250 miles above our heads. Astronauts see things regularly that don't match any known spacecraft, satellite, or natural phenomenon. They report them. NASA documents them. And then the information disappears into classified files that the public never sees. The official narrative is that space is empty, predictable, and understood. The astronauts who've been there tell a different story. This is the strangest things astronauts have seen in space. What the official explanations can't account for, and why the gap between what NASA tells the public and what astronauts actually observe keeps growing. 1. The fireflies that shouldn't exist. John Glenn, the first American to orbit Earth in 1962, reported thousands of luminous particles surrounding his spacecraft. He called them fireflies. They were bright, they moved independently, and they appeared to react to his movements. When he banged on the spacecraft wall, they scattered. NASA said they were ice crystals illuminated by sunlight, breaking off the spacecraft as it moved through extreme temperature changes. But here's the problem with that explanation. Glenn was a Marine Corps pilot, test pilot, and engineer. He'd flown in every condition imaginable. He knew what ice crystals looked like, and he insisted these weren't ice. They glowed from within, not from reflected light. They moved in ways that ice crystals, which have no propulsion, couldn't move. And they reacted to sound vibrations traveling through the vacuum of space, which is physically impossible for particles. Scott Carpenter saw them on the next Mercury mission. Same luminous particles, same independent movement. NASA repeated the ice crystal explanation. Carpenter, also a test pilot with perfect observational skills, disagreed. He said they appeared to be intelligently controlled. Then Gordon Cooper saw them on Mercury 9. And he added something new. They weren't just floating around randomly. They seemed to move in formation, like they had purpose. His observation that the objects moved with apparent purpose was noted in the mission report and never addressed publicly. The phenomenon continued. Astronauts on Gemini missions reported the same particles. Shuttle astronauts saw them. IS astronauts see them now. For 60 years. Astronauts have reported self-illuminating particles that move independently in space. For 60 years, NASA has said ice crystals and moved on. But ice crystals don't glow from within. They don't move in formation. They don't react to sound in a vacuum. And they don't appear consistently across 6 decades of spaceflight on different spacecraft with different materials that could theoretically produce different ice crystals. The fireflies remain unexplained. 2. The object following Apollo 11. On the way to the moon in July 1969, the Apollo 11 crew, Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins, observed an object keeping pace with their spacecraft. It maintained consistent distance. It didn't appear to be tumbling like debris would. Collins described it as a cylinder with open sides. NASA said it was one of the 4 panels from the SEVB rocket stage that had separated earlier. Just debris tumbling along a similar trajectory. But here's what makes that impossible. The SFEB panels separated when Apollo 11 was accelerating away from Earth. By the time the crew saw this object, they'd performed a trajectory correction burn and changed velocity. The panels would have continued on their original trajectory. They had no propulsion. Yet this object matched Apollo 11's new trajectory perfectly. Michael Collins was insistent about what he saw. In post-flight debriefing, he described the object as having structure, appearing manufactured, and maintaining consistent orientation, none of which debris would do. The conversation was recorded but classified for years. When it was finally released, the relevant portions about the object's behavior had been redacted. Armstrong refused to discuss it publicly. For a man who spoke openly about nearly every aspect of the mission, his silence on this particular observation was conspicuous. In private conversations years later, he reportedly said, "There are things out there that we don't understand." Buzz Aldrin has been more forthcoming. In a 2005 interview, he confirmed they saw something, that it kept pace with them for hours, and that NASA's explanation about rocket panels didn't make sense based on what we observed. He's since been more circumspect, likely due to pressure, but his initial statements are on record. The object was photographed. Multiple frames from the spacecraft's cameras show a bright object at consistent distance and apparent size. If it were debris tumbling away, it should have appeared smaller over time. It didn't. NASA released heavily edited versions of these photos. The original high-resolution images remained classified. 3. The Tether Incident. In February 1996, Space Shuttle Columbia was on mission STS-75, deploying a 12-mile-long conductive tether as a power generation experiment. The tether broke and drifted away. NASA cameras captured something extraordinary. Dozens of disc-shaped objects, glowing and pulsating, moving around the tether in apparently controlled patterns. NASA said the objects were ice particles or debris close to the camera, appearing large due to the camera being out of focus. The glow was caused by the camera's overexposure to small, bright particles. But here's why that explanation falls apart under scrutiny. The tether was 12 miles long and 2.5 miles away from the shuttle when this was filmed. Multiple objects are clearly visible moving behind the tether, meaning they were at least 2.5 miles away. If they were ice particles close to the camera, they couldn't appear behind a tether that was miles distant. The objects weren't moving like debris. Debris in orbit follows predictable trajectories, essentially straight lines with no course corrections. These objects changed direction. They accelerated. They slowed down. One object moves directly toward the tether, then executes a 90-degree turn to avoid it. Ice particles don't avoid obstacles. The size calculations are disturbing. If the objects were behind the tether at 2.5 plus miles distance, and they appeared several inches across on camera, the actual objects would have been 50 meters, 100 feet in diameter. That's not ice particles. That's not camera tricks. That's massive objects maneuvering in Earth orbit. The footage was broadcast live on NASA Select. Millions of people saw it in real time. The astronauts' voices are audible on the feed, expressing confusion about what they're seeing. Flight controllers in Houston are asking questions. Then the feed cuts. When it returns, the camera is pointed at Earth. No further discussion of the objects. NASA's final report mentions debris. once and never addresses the object's behavior, size, or the fact that they're clearly behind the tether in multiple frames. The report focuses entirely on the tether failure and ignores the most documented anomaly of the entire mission. 4. Buzz Aldrin's monolith on Phobos. This one's technically not something seen during a mission, but Buzz Aldrin has repeatedly discussed it publicly. He said, "We should visit the moons of Mars. There's a monolith there, a very unusual structure on this little potato-shaped object that goes around Mars once every 7 hours. When people find out about that, they're going to say, 'Who put that there? Who put that there?' Well, the universe put it there. Or if you choose, God put it there." NASA says it's a large boulder, common on asteroid-like bodies, that appears unusual due to lighting and viewing angle. But here's what makes this different from normal geological features. The monolith on Phobos is a rectangular structure approximately 300 feet tall, standing vertically from the moon's surface. It casts a perfectly geometric shadow. Natural rock formations don't create perfect rectangles. Wind erosion creates irregular shapes. Impact craters create round or irregular depressions. Vertical rectangular structures don't form naturally. The Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter photographed it in high resolution in 2008. The images show sharp, defined edges and a consistent rectangular shape. ESA's Mars Express orbiter photographed it from a different angle in 2010. Same rectangular structure, same vertical orientation, multiple viewing angles rule out the "it's just the angle" explanation. Buzz Aldrin's phrasing is interesting. He said the universe put it there, or God put it there, both passive constructions that avoid saying it's natural. For a man who chooses his words carefully and has dealt with NASA PR for decades, this phrasing suggests he doesn't believe it's a natural formation but can't say what he really thinks. Phobos itself is anomalous. Its orbit is decaying. It's slowly spiraling toward Mars. Its density is far lower than it should be for a captured asteroid, leading some scientists to speculate it's partially hollow, and it has this perfectly rectangular structure standing upright on its surface. NASA has no plans to investigate it closely. 5. The blue light that passed through ISS. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station reported a bright blue light that appeared to pass through the station's modules. Multiple crew members saw it simultaneously from different locations. It lasted 4 seconds, moved through solid walls and left no damage or radiation signature. Ball lightning, a rare atmospheric phenomenon that occasionally occurs at high altitudes and somehow made it to the ISS's orbit at 250 miles. But here's the problem. Ball lightning is poorly understood, but it's consistently associated with thunderstorms and typically lasts less than a second. The ISS is 250 miles above Earth's atmosphere where thunderstorms occur. There were no storms beneath the station at the time. And ball lightning doesn't pass through solid objects. It either dissipates on contact or explodes. The astronauts described it as passing through the station's walls as if they weren't there. From one module to another, through pressure bulkheads designed to contain atmosphere. No sound, no impact, no physical interaction, just a blue sphere of light moving in a straight line through solid matter. This wasn't the first time. Russian cosmonauts reported similar phenomena in the 1980s on Mir. They called them space angels and described them as luminous spheres that moved independently and sometimes appeared to follow cosmonauts during spacewalks. Those reports were dismissed as hallucinations caused by cosmic radiation. But ISS has radiation shielding that Mir lacked, and hallucinations don't appear to multiple people simultaneously from different locations. When 3 astronauts in different parts of the station see the same blue light at the same time, moving in the same direction, it's not a hallucination. It's something physical. NASA's report classified the incident as unexplained environmental phenomenon and moved on. No investigation, no follow-up observations, no sensor data released. The astronauts were instructed not to discuss it in public interviews. 6. The face in the window. In 2013, Italian astronaut Luca Parmitano was working in the ISS Cupola, the seven-window observation module, when he saw a face looking at him from outside. Not a reflection. A face. With features. Looking directly at him. He jerked back in shock, then looked again. Nothing there. Visual illusion caused by fatigue and the brain's tendency to see faces in random patterns, pareidolia. But here's what Parmitano emphasized. He wasn't looking at Earth or clouds, where pareidolia might create a face-like pattern. He was looking at the black void of space. There was nothing there to form a pattern. The face appeared against empty darkness, lasted several seconds with distinct features, and then vanished. Parmitano is a former test pilot and fighter pilot. His job required perfect visual acuity and the ability to identify objects under stress. He's trained to observe accurately and report precisely. His immediate reaction, jerking back in shock, is documented on ISS internal cameras. Something startled him badly enough to cause an instinctive physical response. He wasn't alone in seeing faces. Russian cosmonauts have reported similar observations since the 1970s. Chinese astronauts on Tian reported seeing figures outside the station windows. These reports are consistent across different space programs, different station designs, and different crew nationalities. The pareidolia explanation requires a pattern to misinterpret. Seeing a face in clouds works because clouds have shapes that vaguely suggest features. Seeing a face in darkness requires the brain to generate an entire hallucination from nothing. That's not pareidolia. That's psychosis. And Parmitano showed no other signs of mental distress. NASA's response was to add vision anomalies to the standard medical monitoring for long-duration spaceflight. They never explained what would cause healthy astronauts with perfect vision to see distinct faces in empty space. They just started tracking how often it happens. 7. The thing that knocked on the spacecraft in 2003. Chinese astronaut Yang Liwei, China's first person in space, reported hearing someone knocking on the spacecraft from outside. Irregular. Coming from the hull. He looked out the window. Nothing there. The sound continued intermittently throughout the flight. Thermal expansion and contraction of the spacecraft hull as it passed between sunlight and shadow, causing metal to flex and create sounds. But here's why that doesn't work. Yang Liwei flew on Shenzhou 5, China's first crewed spacecraft. It was based on Russian Soyuz designs that had flown hundreds of missions without astronauts reporting knocking sounds. Thermal expansion is constant and predictable. It doesn't create irregular knocking patterns that sound like deliberate action. Yang Liwei described it as distinct and purposeful. It sounded like someone or something hitting the spacecraft hull from outside, not creaking, not groaning, knocking. And he emphasized that it was irregular, sometimes rapid knocks, sometimes single knocks with long pauses. Chinese engineers spent months trying to replicate the sound after the mission. They tested thermal expansion, equipment vibration, air pressure changes, and every other mechanical explanation. None produced the exact sound Yang Liwei described. The investigation concluded with unexplained acoustic phenomenon. Fei Junlong and Ni Haisheng on Shenzhou 6 in 2005 reported the same knocking. Same irregular pattern, same apparent external source, and again on Shenzhou 7 in 2008. 3 separate missions, 3 separate crews, all reporting identical unexplained knocking sounds that engineers couldn't reproduce or explain. China's space program doesn't release much information publicly, but Yang Liwei has discussed this in multiple interviews. He's never wavered from his description. It sounded like knocking. It was external, and it was unexplained. He also noted that before the flight, he was told by Russian cosmonauts to expect unusual sounds in space, but was given no details. 8. The grid that appeared in Earth's atmosphere in 1998. Space Shuttle Discovery astronauts photographed something extraordinary in Earth's upper atmosphere, a geometric grid pattern covering hundreds of square miles. perfectly straight lines intersecting at right angles, glowing faintly, stretching from horizon to horizon. High-altitude clouds lit by moonlight, creating the illusion of geometric patterns. But here's the problem. Clouds don't form perfect grids. Atmospheric processes create irregular patterns, swirls, waves, cells, never geometric precision. And the grid was photographed at multiple times during the mission from different angles. If it were clouds, they would have moved, dissipated, or changed shape. The grid remained geometrically perfect. The photographs show lines that are absolutely straight for hundreds of miles. Natural phenomena don't create straight lines at that scale. Rivers curve. Mountain ranges follow tectonic patterns. Weather systems spiral. Straight lines repeated in parallel suggest artificial construction or some unknown physical process that doesn't match any atmospheric science. Multiple astronauts saw it and photographed it. This wasn't one person misinterpreting what they saw. The entire crew observed the phenomenon and documented it extensively. The photographs are in NASA's archives but rarely published or discussed. Similar grid patterns have been photographed from the ISS. In 2014, an astronaut posted a photo showing geometric patterns in clouds over the Pacific. The post was deleted within hours. In 2019, another ISS crew photographed rectangular patterns in atmospheric glow. That image was also removed from public feeds. NASA's explanation that these are clouds would require clouds to form in ways that violate meteorology. Clouds follow air currents. Air currents don't create perfect grids covering hundreds of miles. Either there's an atmospheric process that science doesn't understand, or there's something creating geometric patterns in Earth's upper atmosphere that NASA won't discuss. Why the pattern matters more than individual cases. Here's what you need to understand. Any single one of these incidents could be dismissed. Unusual observation could be misidentification. Strange object could be debris. Weird lights could be ice crystals. That's what NASA does. Takes each incident in isolation and provides a plausible explanation that requires you to ignore the astronaut's expertise and observational skills. But the pattern is undeniable. Spanning multiple space programs from different countries, trained observers with perfect vision and scientific knowledge consistently report phenomena that official explanations can't adequately account for. Luminous particles that move independently, reported by American, Russian, Chinese, and European astronauts, consistent behavior across different spacecraft and decades. Official explanation: ice crystals. Except ice crystals don't glow from within or move in formation. Objects that pace spacecraft and maintain formation reported on Gemini, Apollo, Shuttle, and ISS missions. Objects that change trajectory to match spacecraft maneuvers. Official explanation: debris. Except debris doesn't have propulsion, geometric patterns and structures. Grids in the atmosphere. Rectangular monoliths on Phobos. Disc-shaped objects in precise formations. Official explanation: natural formations, camera artifacts, ice crystals. Except nature doesn't create geometric precision at massive scales. Sounds, lights, and apparitions that can't be explained by equipment malfunction. Knocking from outside in vacuum, blue lights passing through solid walls. Faces in empty darkness. Official explanation: thermal expansion, ball lightning, pareidolia. Except these explanations require ignoring physical laws or the observer's credibility. The common thread isn't that these things are unexplained. It's that they're consistently observed, carefully documented, and then officially dismissed with explanations that don't withstand scrutiny. The people seeing these phenomena are trained engineers, scientists, pilots, and military personnel, the most credible observers humanity has. They're not prone to wild speculation or mass hallucination. And yet NASA's response is always the same. Provide a minimal explanation that technically could account for the observation if you ignore inconvenient details, then classify or bury the documentation. The public gets reassuring explanations. The astronauts know what they saw didn't match what they were told to say. What astronauts won't say publicly. Gordon Cooper, before he died, spoke openly about seeing unidentified objects during his Mercury and Gemini flights. He said NASA instructed him never to discuss these observations publicly. He ignored those instructions in his later years, stating, "I believe that these extraterrestrial vehicles and their crews are visiting this planet from other planets." Apollo 14 astronaut repeatedly said that government agencies have been aware of extraterrestrial contact for decades and that he'd been briefed by officials with direct knowledge. He was dismissed as a conspiracy theorist despite his impeccable credentials and reputation. Brian O'Leary, former astronaut and Princeton physics professor, said before his death, "There is abundant evidence that we are being contacted, that civilizations have been monitoring us for a very long time. These aren't random UFO enthusiasts. These are highly educated, scientifically trained individuals who flew in space and chose to speak publicly despite knowing they'd be dismissed or ridiculed. They had nothing to gain and credibility to lose. They spoke anyway." The astronauts, still active in the space program, don't speak publicly about anomalies. They've learned from the ones who did. Speak out and you're marginalized. Stick to the script and your career continues. The choice is clear. But sometimes things slip through. A video posted and then deleted. An interview where someone says too much before the PR handlers step in. A photograph that makes it to public archives before someone realizes what it shows. These glimpses reveal that the official narrative space is empty and predictable, doesn't match what people up there actually experience. The strangest thing isn't what they've seen. The strangest thing isn't the fireflies, the objects, the lights, the grids, or any individual phenomenon. The strangest thing is the systematic pattern of observation, documentation, classification, and dismissal that's been consistent for 6 decades across multiple space programs. Astronauts see something unusual. They report it following protocol. NASA documents it in mission transcripts and photographs. Then the information either gets classified, gets released with minimal context and dismissive explanations, or disappears entirely from public access. The message is clear. We don't want you to know what's actually happening 250 miles above your head. We'll send the best trained observers humanity has to space. We'll equip them with the most advanced cameras and sensors. They'll see things that don't match our understanding of physics, orbital mechanics, or atmospheric science. And we'll tell you it's ice crystals. The astronauts who've been there know better. Some stay silent to protect their careers. Some speak out and get dismissed as unreliable. But they all know what they saw. And it's not what NASA tells you they saw. The strangest things astronauts have seen in space aren't the phenomena themselves. It's the gap between what they observed and what we're allowed to know. That gap has been growing for 60 years, and it keeps growing every time another astronaut looks out the window and sees something that shouldn't exist.